I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.
Because the problem is, like, in this era as well, like, obviously you would have liked to see what would happen at Worlds with that TL team, because even though you went to the Origin team, this was, if people don't know, when it all collapsed. Like, that was when the fucking team just went to shit. Cold had to remove himself. Like, they didn't make the playoffs. They didn't get through the regional. Like, it was just a bloody nightmare. Like, look, we can talk about the later Origin stuff. That's interesting. But you walked into a fucking mess in this team. Like, they were supposed to be like the second best team, but it just fell apart, right? Everything just collapsed in on itself.
Yeah, I mean, I showed up. I showed up in like day 2 of me showing up. Like our performance director, like basically got into like top of his lungs yelling match with Alphari because he like missed one yoga at 8 a.m.
Okay. Okay.
Like,
oh, by the way, people think that's a meme, by the way. They don't know that the Astralis org, that shit is all real. Like, they really are like the meme of, like, and everyone, like, you drink your water and go to bed early and then do yoga and, you know, and you all have to live in Denmark. It's fucking weird, isn't it? It's just, here's the thing, like, some of it I can see the positive side in theory, but it feels a bit like you're in a cult or something, mate. It's a bit weird.
Yeah, so like it was like 2 days in, like I show up and that goes on. I'm like, what just happened? Like, because like the first day I'm there, I'm like, okay, I'm like jet lagged. I'm like, I'm just gonna go sit at the apartment and sleep. Day 2, like I show up for the first meeting. There's like some huge implosion. I'm like, whoa, what just happened? And then like probably after a week, then Cold had to take his like medical leave, which it is what it is. Like, that's maybe it was probably justified because he took a long time off. Like,
he was out for like a year or more, I think.
Yeah, he was mentally burnt out. But I was not given the notice that was occurring.
Right.
I think it was out of the blue. So I joined during this whole situation, and then we had Zanzara come in.
Yeah.
Zanzara had to play on a visa that was barely valid by the time he could play. Like, he wasn't going to be able to play at Worlds if he made Worlds. And he was playing from Russia.
Okay.
He was like remote playing in from Russia, never interacted with the team, and then we went 3-2 with Splice. We lost to Splice in Game 5 when that Splice team ended up making top 8 at Worlds. So that was the Alphari. That was Alphari, Mithy, Patrick, Nukeduck, and then it was Cold / Zanzara. Yes. Maybe Zanzara was there in person. I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure, like, until like match day, he was just playing remotely from Russia, which is hilarious. 2 weeks of play, but yeah, that was a collapse at the end, and then the 2020 year with Origin. Sorry, where we got to assemble the roster, but.
Right, let's talk about that then, because as you say, this was where you weren't just the analyst. This was where you got that like title, like head of scouting or whatever the fuck, where you got to actually have some say. And this is when, like, there you go. And this is when, as I say, this is where, if you rewind to the beginning of the interview, Destiny obviously comes in, doesn't he? Now, look, this is what people don't know, but if you've listened to enough interviews, you've figured it out by now. One, if you know any of my work in CSGO, this was just the era when the org Astralis, because a lot of people don't get this. They know that they obviously won all those championships in CSGO, but you have to understand, guys, like, you don't get paid for what you did in the past. You get paid based on like your sponsorship deals and your current business stuff now. So that doesn't mean they had like loads of money. Like, spoiler, people like FaZe Clan have way more money. They have like fucking millions and millions. Astralis was still an org that was running like certain margins, and because we came to 2020, and you might remember certain things that happened in 2020 that changed the whole world, right? This was one of the orgs where at the same time, to be fair, in America, everyone was doing those loans from the fucking government because they needed to keep their esports org running. Well, in this particular case, Astralis was the one that came to the players in both CSGO and League and basically told them, like, we need you to take a pay cut. Except, I've even had this, I think it was in maybe Alphari's interview or something. They didn't even just do that. They did it in like a way that was mental, where it was like, they told people. I've heard they told him before like a playoff match. Like, go on, give us the story. Isn't it something that they just told people, like, basically, like, that guy there's fired if you don't take the pay cut? Like, what?
They did this like before we played FNATIC and like spring playoffs. Like, we're about to get into a best of 5 with FNATIC. I think we lost 3-1. It was like 4 hours before the playoff match. Like, hey, by the way, guys, if you guys don't take like a 30% pay cut, 3 people in the office are fired or something. Like, something is extreme.
Right before the match as well.
Like, I remember Andre just like literally looking at him, like, and he's like, not the time. Like, we try to like tilt the whole team before we get into a match. Like, but yeah, that's basically how that whole situation played out. And that was also after the pay cut situation. That was after we all agreed to take pay reductions to get
just to get upset in the team, isn't it? Yeah, because that's the other thing I always felt so unfair about how fans judge that team. Each of those players, dude, Nukeduck, Upset, and Alphari, get shit for that team because on paper, when you have all three, it looks like, wow, it's a super team. But it's like, they are, spoiler, even when they were Origin before that and they had Alphari and Nukeduck, I imagine those players were already breaking the bank, by the way, guys. They weren't a team with a lot of money. As you say, in this scenario, it's actually because Upset was already so sick of being like the one-man carry on like teams that can never win the championship that he was willing to just join this team. The premise here was like, look, it's going to suck money-wise, but let's just do it and see if the team can be good. And then obviously, like you say with the Destiny thing, there was just no money left. And at that point in time, I've heard they offered Mithy like a fucking almost insulting amount of like low money. So like you say, there was no one would have taken it except someone where that's just a way better league to be in than he was currently in Destiny. So like, if you actually look at it, oh, what a mess of a situation. Like obviously some of those players were really good. Like I think it's justified some of them even considered the best, but it's hard. It's going to be hard to win in a mess like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the team was. Yeah, I mean, if they had like just a little bit more funding, not like astronomical amounts, I think the team could have been set up to succeed. Like we had to also remove Fabian, which is our sports psychologist who now runs like an agency. Before the year, like I joined with the intention of it was going to be me, Andre, Fabian on the staff. And then leading into 2020, they added me full time, and they removed Fabian, which then also shook up the dynamic of.
I've heard a lot of people love that guy as well. Thought he did a very good job.
Yeah, he was good at getting everyone like mentally on the same, like mentally stable and ready on the same page. Like, so that also shook the team a little bit. Where like, and then once I was removed, then the team like didn't have enough supporting pieces to balance all the roster. As you saw with the FNATIC team situation, you need every single staff member pulling their weight to an extent. And if you don't pull their weight with all the star players and talent, it's just going to implode internally. So I think that was a situation where I think if they had had a little bit more funding and people in place, I think they would have that team would have made worlds. I still believe that to this day with the talent on the roster. Now, do I think we would have done super well with because the insufficiencies of the roster? I think we would have probably had to make roster just moves. But yeah, that's just my opinion on that situation. Astralis, overall, I think the funding situation is not. Then they were also trying to keep a perfect public image.
Yes,
because they had the IPO, like they went public and whatnot.
Yep. Understandable.
So. But internally, I think the way they handled the budgeting situation was obviously to give them see it from their perspective. That was the COVID year where they were supposed to launch an Astralis store.
Yep.
So a part of their that store, to my knowledge, is doing well now because they're like huge in Denmark.
Yes.
But because of COVID, that revenue was then not realized at the time. So then they just I think the teams would have probably taken the pay reduction if they asked appropriately and not in the manner in which they did, because then that just doing it before a playoff match just set the whole mood towards it negative.
Sure. Right, obviously we'll get into some of the players, but for this team, fuck the Team Liquid one. This is the scandalous one, right? Because I've heard, by the way, Case, right, the way this officially happened was, because again, he left this team early, right? Officially what happened was, like, Riot punished you. I've never even heard of this, bro. Like a fucking analyst being punished by Riot in like a competitive route. What? Like that already is like, that's setting red flags off like a motherfucker if you know some of the shit behind the scenes people have done in League of Legends. Like, so officially, right, you're getting punished like publicly, which just looks, by the way, like that's the excuse for Astralis to go, oh, we have to get rid of him now, which conveniently means you just get rid of another person's fucking paycheck. And I've heard behind the scenes there was maybe some like shenanigans in the org where it's like they just wanted to get rid of you. It was nothing to do with like ability. Like I said, all the players were loving you. They were fucking hating when you got kicked. Give me some thoughts on this. What went down from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, this is also after it was like the playoffs where like G2 didn't, in my opinion, try their hardest. And then also where the broadcast was shining negative lights on our roster.
Okay.
If you remember. So I made like a 40-minute video that I gave to Riot EU privately, basically just showing like narrative beforehand, our play, and the narrative after, and how it was negatively impacting. Like I think we were called like Origen or something. Like, or playing slow was like worse than playing fast. That was also the era where G2 was like 2020, where they were playing super, super fast paced. And not every team can play like G2 where they can all play that fast, that quick with all the laners being in sync. I think that really comes down to roster assembly, which as teams have now seen, like you can't just play accelerated that's playing very high variance. So I think that also kind of should shine in a negative light, but I think the way I was removed was, I think there was multiple reasons for the removal that was not listed in the main reason. Like I was
like the problem with that angle is like the idea you toxing a solo queue wouldn't really explain why Astralis would remove you as like a coach, if you know what I mean. Like I don't see the connection between the two, even if that was their angle, you know.
Yeah, they was like toxic. I think that was just more of a reason to remove me at the time.
I mean, it just works for fans. Let's be real. If you just say a player's toxic, they go, "I hate toxic people in my game," and then they just buy. Everyone can be banned at that point. I've noticed every player.
Yeah, and Riot left it as vague as possible as well.
They did that thing with people don't know where they intentionally phrase it so that they leave the door so wide open you could be saying like crazy slurs, or you could just be a guy like "fuck off jungler, why don't you come to my lane?" Like they almost specifically leave it like that so you could just imagine anything into what the guy did, right?
And you have to think back to that time as well in like 2019 when like all the public situation was going on, like just how the whole like global social media, internet was operating. So they left it very vague, which that it is what it is at this point, but it's something. I think the removal definitely, they didn't fill my role once I was removed with someone. Like they basically like half filled the role, and if like I told you, like if you don't have the ancillary pieces on staff with with rosters with large personalities, they can easily implode and crumble. Like if you have Alphari pulling all once the resources top, and then you have Upset pulling all the resources bought, and they both have strong personalities and how they respect each other and they actually friends. But when it comes to end game balancing with Xerxe, who's also like more of a passive player, so if you don't have like people like solving mini fires, and then Upset playing with Destiny, where Upset, and I think Destiny would probably even admit this, like Upset's clearly a tier above his play level, so Upset has like dissatisfaction with that situation. Then you have Xerxe not knowing where to go on the map. Then you have the organization asking for certain scenarios, like making everyone wake up at 8 a.m. yoga, bike in the rain in Denmark, 30 minutes. Like there's a lot of outside team problems, and if they're just like cutting budget, removing staff members, and then not filling the roles with proper people, then the team can implode quite quickly. And sure, they got 10th, but that was also the year where like 10th was like one game from 6th.
This is the one where the Schalke Miracle run, if people don't know what happened. So this was like probably the craziest parity in the league ever. Like as you say, 10th I think was probably like 1 or 2 games out of playoffs. Like it was pretty close, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so like on paper it looks worse than.
And I think because of the Miracle Run, I'm pretty sure Origin was even like 6th or something, like 2 weeks before the end or something mad. Like it just dropped at the end because it was like a super week or some shit. If people remember the way that season went, that was the one where everyone like G2 and FNATIC almost missed the playoffs. Like people forget how that split goes because they only remember the placing at the end of the split, so they never remember the story of how you got there. Right. One thing this obviously ties into that I did want to ask you about is you are someone who sadly is being cursed the same way I have, mate. Which is you notice no one ever just says like we're just bad at our jobs, that you're just crap at your job. You know anything. What they do is they never talk about what we do at our jobs. They just find things we've said on social media they don't like, and they just make that the entire metric as to whether like we're good or bad, or an idiot or a clever person, or should we be allowed in the scene or not. So in your case, like unfortunately for you, like I to some degree have to play that game because it's part of being a social figure and stuff, right? In your case, unfortunately, it's almost a fact, right, that if you'd never tweeted a single thing in your life, you'd have had a lot easier career. Like it's most of the downsides have come from shit like that, unfortunately. So what do you think on that? Because the thing is this, mate, if you ever go back and look at most of them, where are even the scandals here? Like, bro, I would even say this to a hater. Name the one thing you ever said that was outrageous. Because they're just going to pick stuff like where you implied, like, maybe G2 didn't try that hard. People try, like, he's accusing them of direct match fixing. Like, no, like, that's obviously a fucking misreading. Like, you know, it was all like that. Or it was just stuff where if people know the way the internet is, you posted, like, a mildly conservative opinion and people acted like, oh, my God, how could he say it? Like, what do you think to this? Because like, in English, we call it, like, a storm in a teacup. It's like you're just taking something so small and made it so fucking enormous and like the defining factor or something. To me, it's not that big a deal. Like, it should just be like, at worst, someone could be, I don't like his opinions, right?
Yeah, I mean, social media I think has been a net negative to my overall esports ban, which I understand. A lot of it is self-inflicted for like the current times in which I like what I tweeted, but like I think the resultingly people have to think back to like age as well. Like what was I 20? I started when I was 20. I was 22, 23. Like I just now I take the opinion where I just remove. I don't really try and involve myself too much with Twitter. Like I maybe do a couple tweets, but it's nothing serious anymore. But I do think like how the social media culture is kind of expanded as time's gone on. I think people just take people out of context completely. Like I haven't had like one negative interaction in person with anyone that would ever say any of the stuff directly to me that's worked with me. Everyone I worked with usually says pretty solid, positive things. I think it's just the narrative around social media has ultimately been a negative towards me. But I mean, it is what it is. I don't really think about it too much anymore. Now I'm just gonna lay low probably for the remainder. I don't really see that. There's no benefit to gain out of it, in my opinion.
As you pointed out, obviously on this Origin team, there are a bunch of very misunderstood players that I can ask you about, and you can give me your thoughts on them. So let's just start. We'll just start in the top lane with Alphari. Right, this was the era when it's true. What made this guy's rep really go to the top level? It's no surprise Team Liquid and all the rest. Like, if people don't know, not only did Team Liquid sign him, I heard that was the era also when like he could have also had like a super team with Perkz either in Europe or in America. Like, loads of people wanted to play with this guy. So when the rep was, even though he's in the 10th place team, last place in LEC, people did actually think he was the best top laner. But the problem he's had, if you notice, Kayser, in his career, is because in a lot of his teams, there's been some flaw. Like in Liquid, they had a bunch of flaws in the roster. And then later on, obviously, last year's Vitality was mad flawed. The perception goes like this. People always just say, like, you notice this happens a lot with people who are really good laners. All they do is lane. He is just CSing, and then he doesn't know what to do when he leaves the lane. And then what they make it sound like is like he can't team fight, he can't try. They just make it sound like he's an idiot. Whereas, like, to me, it's definitely not that simple. So give me your thoughts on Alphari. And by the way, as an aside, you know, whenever they say that thing, 'cause they do it the same with my boy fucking Larson, with Upset. Yeah. Whenever they say that he just CSs, it's like, I always just want to sit them down and go, do you know how insane it is as a coach to have a player where you just know he wins lane all the time? Like, that's the dream. What are you talking about? There's not that many players that like that, guys. So come on, give me your thoughts on Alphari.
No, I think he was probably one of the best players I've worked with, in my opinion. Like, super deliberate in his statements out of game. Towards this matchup, I win at this time on this wave. Be here around. Like, he gives like people context in advance, like when they should be expecting. His out of game behavior, I think, was really good towards the team. Like he wasn't like, he doesn't waste words or phrasing. He usually just gets to the point, which can be problematic for some players. But
he's a really blunt guy. He'll just say what he thinks.
Yeah, he's just from He's from Britain or from the UK, Wales. So yeah, it's just he's very to the point. So I think that's a net positive towards teams if it's managed appropriately. I think if managed inappropriately, aka the Team Liquid situation, it could cause multiple.
The joke is, I could have told
problems.
This guy, of all the people going to LCS, mate, that ain't the culture for you. You're not going to be a culture fit there. They're not going to like that.
Yeah, or you need to go in the right environment or team. But
like, I've basically told the story, and like I've sort of implied it in that video. But like, essentially, if you're a fan, it's long enough now. No one cares. He essentially just straight up told Jack to his face that, yeah, I don't think you're a good coach. You know what you're talking about, whatever. It's like, to him in Alphari's world, that's like, I'm just being honest. It's like, bro, what are you doing? Like, it's going to be the end of the world. So yeah, you can just, if you know that about him, you know, like you say, if it's the right environment, that's going to be an awesome quality to have. If it's a vibe where it's like an Emperor's Low Clothes thing, it's going to be the worst person to have, because he's going to be the little kid who's like, you haven't got any clothes on there. Like, what the fuck? Don't say that. We don't all say that. So I know what you mean by that totally as a teammate, sure.
Yeah. So I think it's a net positive if you have the right staff and infrastructure in place to handle the conversations correctly, which I think Europe does a way better job at this, the European team staff model. Like, it's just more the culture where you're allowed to just speak more directly to the players and they just understand it's just to improve at the game. In the US, you kind of have to dance the line sometimes. And otherwise, I think Alphari, like, yeah, his lane phase is obviously good. His champion diversity, he more so came from the cloth where he'd rather perfect 5 or 6 champions.
Yes.
And then understand. He's kind of like the Reckless vein, but more champions. Well, not not the same, not as extreme, because he would obviously play everything, but he had like 4 or 5 champions where he perfected the matchups on and could play them, and they were like usually like the champs that never really go out of meta. It's like the Nars, the
exactly.
Gangplanks. Yep. He can play Ornn, he could play Kennen as well, even though I think Kennen, AD Kennen was not it. It's not a very good pick in my opinion, because you need your team to all play around it. But so he had a set of champions. Camille is one. Like, he played champions really well. And then for mid game, I think he kind of, his view on how to win the game wasn't as high or wasn't as proficient as early game. But in my opinion, you can teach mid game if you have the right staff. So I'm not sure what happened on all the teams after I was not working with him. Like, I wasn't with the Team Liquid team at the time. I was with TSM, and then on the summer split, I was there in the spring split where we got fourth in Origin, and then and that was the year where we ran into G2, who ended up just winning the whole split. And then before the FNATIC series, we had the org implode the roster somewhat. So we were in fourth when I was there, and then like I left after spring, and then I don't know what happened in summer completely, and the Team Liquid, I don't know what happened. Vitality this past year, I wasn't aware of what happened either. So yeah, I think mid game he just loses sight of how to win the game sometimes if it's in like a state where he's not like hard winning. But I think in terms of early game to mid game transition, he's still probably one of the better top laners when he has a lead, which is how basically he carried TL in 2021.
Yes.
2 Worlds. So
it's funny that you think that, because I thought the same thing, mate. At that year, even TL, maybe because someone didn't like him because he was a European or something, but people were even flaming him in that team. Like, he's just shit. It's like, bro, he's the only one doing anything. It's just him just dying on his own with no one following up. Like, he's getting every lane he can. He's getting every advantage he can. Like, what do you want him to do? Can't 1v9 as a top laner, for fuck's sake.
I mean, my opinion towards anyone saying this type of stuff is, as a fan, just go back and go look up 2021 TL spring and summer, and just go watch the first 15 minutes of the game and see what the whole game plan was for the first 15 minutes. Like, go watch every single blue side game for first 15 minutes. Go watch every single red side game first 15 minutes, and see who is actually generating the enemy team to actually have to defend or respond to who's the play. It definitely wasn't the tactical Core JJ lane, because that was the era where Core was playing like Shen River support. So yeah. I mean, it's just, go actually watch the VODs before having a formed opinion on it. It would be then form your opinion. So.
And then obviously the other person who I think got it the hardest on this team was Upset, because a lot of people I've noticed in his career, it's funny because this just reminds me of Doublelift's career before he got to TSM and had all the championships and stuff, is people always want to believe that like the one-man carry is actually like overrated, you notice. But what's mad to me is the eye test on Upset checks out like a motherfucker. He's just so good. Like, guys, he's what you would want every ADC to, even when they say like, but he wants all the resources and to like, so you mean he wants to get fed as an ADC and get to the team fights? Yeah, no shit. Because that's why he's fucking Superman in it. Like I don't. And also, when you say that, like, it's not like he just drags resources bot and then doesn't know what to do with it. Like, he's going to win late. He's going to have his picks and be strong. And if you maneuver him into a team fight, he's going to do fucking loads of damage. Like, because this is another player. I mean, to this day, even he gets hated on, even by FNATIC fans, for fuck's sake. Like, what do you think about Upset then? Because again, he's another one that has this really contrasted opinion. But again, put it this way, a lot of people who've played with this guy think he's fucking amazing, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I had no negative working. He's similar to Alphari, where he just, like, in review, he can be very direct to players and be like, hey, I need you to do this exact thing. Just like we path to mid or we path to top, and like we go for a top gank when bot needs cover, and then the game explodes because top doesn't carry or something, and he gets like sacrificed. I think generally the better way, what you said was pretty accurate. He just wants resources put into him, but he knows how to like operate with resources and carry. He can also play weak sided, not saying he can't. It's just, why would you handicap your team if you have the option to snowball support and AD instead of just top? And especially in the more recent years where bot lane has just become a more important lane. I think overall it's just been more important than top. Yeah. I think the only year was that 2021 year. So I think Upset was really good. I think the public perception of him being toxic and whatnot is not very accurate. I think from being on a team with him, he was anything but toxic.
Dude, what happens with that one is, that also is a weird one, because there definitely are players in the league that are toxic. But in his case, in my opinion, the only reason that even exists is because I would just say he's really serious. I wouldn't say toxic. I would say he's a very serious guy who is all about, like, it's not acting like for a movie. He really is just all about, like, winning. Like, we should be all doing the best. Everyone should be putting in mad hours. Now, that is going to come off if a teammate's more of, like, a free spirit. They're going to maybe think that's toxic, or they might not like it. But in my opinion, the joke is, like, I would want to play like this, mate, where I just know, like, right, he's taking care of. I don't have to fucking motivate him. He's going to do it all himself. Yeah,
he like grinds solo. He's one of the grinding players where he would just play like 60 games a week. So you never had to worry about him putting in effort. He would be more so frustrated if other players in the team weren't reciprocating like half the amount of effort, or like they'd have to be playing like a good amount, or their play on stage would have to be very very good, or just up to par. You can't be like a reason the team is losing, then also not putting in effort. Which honestly, like for the amount of money the players are making, it should be the standard that you're
agreed.
That you're at least putting in up to par effort. Even if you're not underperforming, like at least be trying hard.
So don't you even think as well, by the way, because I get the vibe on both players. They've got the same rep, you notice. Alphari and Upset, the rep is like they're both sort of good, but maybe overrated because they just want all of it. The premise is, in my opinion, it's the other way around. It's like they were in too many bad teams where they were like the best player by far. And it's just like, it's really hard to trust teammates that don't play as much as you, don't know all the fucking lanes, are going to just waste the result. In that scenario, eventually you get to, you just like, look, the one thing I know is if you give me the resource, I'll carry. Just give it to me. That's who you're going to become. I can easily see how a player can get that position.
Yeah, I mean, you can even just look at the last year FNATIC roster.
By the end, it was just an upset show, wasn't it? It was like, just give him everything. Maybe he can win the game for us.
Yeah, I remember, like, if anyone that's actually scouted that FNATIC team, they remember, like, they would just never move for Herald regardless of the situation. So Upset would be like, guys, I am not moving to miss CS bottom, probably because he's probably in scrims have moved for so many Heralds that it just went so poorly. This is all speculation.
Yeah, sure.
But this is just from me watching the official matches that he's like, I am not going to be moving off of known wave state to move into some unknown Herald fight off someone else's calls that just explodes my game. So I think that's kind of a speculation, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Yeah, I had no problems working with Upset. I thought he was really good. I would work with him again if I could. It's just he's another player. Yeah, the public perception is not even close to relating to his actual ability on a team. So.
Right, this might actually be the most interesting time to ask you about Xerxe, the jungler, though, because right now he's obviously unfortunately getting fucking panned, as we say in English, because everyone hates on the XL team. But one thing I'll say is very interesting. One thing that's almost saved him this split is people might have seen on like Nemesis's stream and stuff where they watched that video that XL released of all the voice comms for that amazing Vitality game. You know, the one that was like 55 minutes long or whatever the fuck. They released that voice comms, but then they deleted it apparently later. Well, the joke is, if you watch the voice comms, mate, Xerxe just like instantly redeemed because he's talking the whole time. He's doing his best even at the end of the split. He's trying to get people to like have a game plan, do stuff like other people are saying fuck all. They're just leaving him doing nothing. People not even responding to plans. Like the main problem he has obviously is in a lot of his teams they seem to revert to this style where he's super passive. He farms. He isn't the super like gank hungry guy. And so the perception of a lot of his teams is they become like the mid to late game team and they have to try and like out macro someone later or have like a better team fight later, etc. Right? He himself, bizarrely, Kays, has a totally different perception. He still says, I even did an interview with him last year, where he thinks he is like that's just what teams made him do. And if he had his way, you know, he would be this ganking jungler and he'd be this fucking aggressive guy, which is weird because one of those examples where players have a totally different perception of themselves than they even appear to be in the game. So what I want to know was, you worked with him. This is actually one of the teams, as like you said, the spring one of this team. It wasn't bad, actually. It was a pretty decent squad. It was quite cohesive. So yeah. What do you think about this guy? What are the challenges of working with him? What's he good at?
Yeah, I mean, at least from the time I worked with him, again, we had Upset and Alphari, so like his voice was not, he's not going to dominate the room in terms of voice on the team. So if you're the jungler constantly getting pulled between lanes, he can kind of be like lost in direction on about who to follow. Because if he goes bot, top might be pissed at him. He goes top, bot lane is going to be pissed at him. So I think his weakness is on teams and rosters with larger personalities. I think he probably doesn't get his voice heard as much. And I think overall, I'm friendly with Xerxe, Drago. I would tell him you still default to playing for yourself and your camp sequencing more, which was a fine way to play before catch-up XP was just reintroduced.
Yes, the game almost goes against his style right now, right? Like he's not getting an edge if he just out-farms you because you can still score and gank, right?
Yeah, so I think they added catch-up XP back, which I don't understand why they did, but they did. So now I think he needs to switch to more of a ganking style. I think so his style of play is more suited for when ganking is still like 33% of what he focuses on, but his camp sequencing is still a primary focus. So he's not going to be like the Malrang that like will drop half his jungle camps, wait till hope the enemy captures them so they respawn a higher level. Like he's more so going to just make sure he farms his camps. He'll look for ganks at the right timings when his camps are down, or he'll do it in between like crossing quadrants. I think his weakness is just lack of voice in teams when it's going poorly if they have a large percentage. I don't know about the Excel situation, to be honest.
No, fair enough.
It seems like everyone on that roster just didn't.
Oh, it's a bad state of affairs, mate. Everything's bad. Everything's bad. Don't worry.
It seems like this format really hindered the new LEC format. Really hindered teams like FNATIC and Excel, where they needed time to like figure out how to play. Like a lot of new pieces on the same roster, like a new roster of 5 different people. I think really hindered them. Speaking of, even though Vitality, we had, I think, a higher skill ceiling than that roster, but I'm not sure what happened behind the scenes. But nothing looked positive from the play. But
sure. Right, what about this then? I do want to ask about one other player, which is obviously Nukeduck, right? And the reason I ask about Nukeduck is because he's another player I feel like the fans have a very different perspective of. Because even though this era that you were around, it was actually just around the time you left, obviously this was the one where his game did go off a hill, and he's already told the story in interviews about he was having all like problems sleeping and like some shit was going wrong in his real life or whatever, right? But you also had him during the era when he was still considered very good. And in fact, what I noticed would happen is this. Fans always thought he was overrated in this time period. Like they thought maybe he was good like years and years ago, because to them, he didn't have the crazy flash to his game. But I've noticed coaches and teammates always like raved about this guy and said he was really good. And like his understanding of the game was like super legit or something. What would you say about Nukeduck as a mid laner?
No, I would put him in the tier just right below Caps at his peak. Like he didn't have the pop off plays when I was working with him. He out of game, he really like pushed him and Mithy they kind of come from the same kind of era, and they both out of game kind of they push the team in review to like constantly work on it, improving. But Nukeduck did it in his practice. Like I can give you one story about this. Like Nukeduck, like if he said like, "Hey, I need you on this side wave, like, hey, we're up tempo. I need you to be here for when this wave is meeting."
There's also another player famously good at knowing about wave state, right?
Yeah, he was really good at wave state. I even learned a couple of things about it. But he would, if in practice, he would push the wave even if the player wasn't there, die on purpose, and then go into review and be like, what are we doing? Like, I called it. Like, you need to be here. So he would die on purpose.
Oh, to sort of mark it in the VOD. That's actually genius. Okay.
Die on purpose to prove a point. Like, hey, we need to do this, like, or else I'm just going to keep inting, basically. Which is kind of an alpha way to go about.
It's pretty good.
Playing.
It's pretty Giga Chad, true.
But no, I have nothing negative to say about Nukeduck other than his sleeping habits were pretty problematic towards the end of that split. And then that was also the split where the new WoW release came out.
Oh, right, so he's one of those people. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So he's like an old school player from like season 2, so he's a huge WoW grinder. So that kind of like aligned at the same time as his sleep habits to an extent. But no, end game wise, I think he's a net positive. He's super smart about the game. Wave states, side laning, and then review. I think he steered a lot of review. So I'm not shocked that he's a coach right now at all.
Right, obviously after this, part of the reason you had to go dark on all my content is you worked for the evil empire, Sauron himself at TSM, right? So obviously you joined TSM. Right, here's the sad thing, dude, is if you look in history, you essentially joined TSM at exactly the worst moment, because if people don't know, the good news is, in the past, there was no such thing as a GM in TSM. Spoiler, Reggie just did all that and picked whoever the fuck he wanted. Him and Perkz, as far as I'm concerned, just did whatever they wanted for years in that team. And look, they had the success for a while, but this was actually the the era where, in theory, Reggie was even saying, like, publicly, I'm going to take my hat, I'm going to give someone else the keys, like, they can pick the team stuff. So I remember when you first were coming along, I was hearing some of the rosters, like, this was the year, if people don't know, where I heard, like, when you joined, that they could have had that team that I leaked on a bunch of shows. They could have had, like, a super team where, because Bjergsen was going out to become the coach, like, Jensen was willing to join as mid laner, Doublelift was going to sign up again. Obviously, there could have been a world where it was SwordArt or the pallet guy. I've heard this, and Huni was going to join in earlier. I've heard there was, like, a super team in the working. Like, was this one that, were you actually involved with potentially putting that together? Was that the team you were trying to make? It sounded really interesting, bro.
Yeah, I mean, that was a part of the roster. I joined in 2020 summer, whenever, like, probably like week 2 of summer. I joined.
Oh, right, okay.
That was like off the record, but it's on the record now. So I joined then. So I was there working remotely. That's when COVID just started, and then I was part of the roster assembly for the 2021 team. I didn't hear about Thorin. I basically committed to TSM. I made like a lot of roster iterations before I got on that call with Parth, and then on that call, I was told Bjergsen's moving to coach. Was like, well, half of these roster iterations are thrown out the window.
Right.
More than half, because that's obviously if you change mid,
it's
a massive piece. So then we were basically in that roster assembly process. We looked at 3 top laners. We needed a native top because we were dead set on importing support. And then it was between Doublelift, Lost. That whole story is public on how that all happened.
Yes.
But we were looking for top and mid at the time.
If people forget as well, the detail they always forget is this was the year when Huni became an eligible, like, native player. He wasn't an import anymore. Yes. So
the top laners we were considering was Licorice, Huni, and Impact. And this was the time where Jensen was still on. Liquid. He was still on Team Liquid, and we didn't have a chance of getting him. So we were probably going to import mid and support. And Thorin and Bjergsen wanted to have an English-speaking roster, which I think is overall a positive. I think most rosters function best if everyone speaks the same language. It just eliminates a lot of context and out of game, and unless you get the right players, but that's a different conversation. But then when evaluating top laners, we looked at basically every single team fight that Huni, Impact, and Licorice played. We ended up looking at them all. Okay, Licorice, no, and then we're down to Huni and Impact, and we basically looked at all the mids that were available that we could feasibly would join TSM at the time. Obviously, you can pie in the sky and hope you can get some of the star players.
You can try and ask for Chovy or whatever, but you're probably not going to get it, of course.
Yeah. So like we were looking at rosters like PoE, Ignar, and then Huni. The reason we chose Huni is for champion diversity, because Impact at the time was mainly playing weak side, and we weren't sure if we were going to have an 80 carry that was going to be a hard carry. And then also if we were going to go with the PoE roster or any of the other mids we were considering, they didn't have the largest champion diversity, so we could very easily be stuck in a tankish team play top 3-4 champions, mages mid, and then a bot lane that's like self-sufficient with a roaming. And we didn't want to have a roaming support with a tank top if we end up going to SwordArt, which I wasn't involved in the prices on all of these, like the price tags on any of this. We were told like Ignar was like too expensive, which is hilarious in hindsight.
Oh, it's ridiculous, yeah.
So we ended up going with Huni because he was better in team fights than Impact, barely, but he also had larger champion diversity at the time.
Yes.
And then PoE was like PoE. I forget who else we were considering, but PoE is the main mid laner we were going with. Spica, and then it was between Lost and Doublelift. We already know the whole backstory. I don't need to get into it, and then SwordArt. It was between SwordArt, Ignar, and a couple others. Pallet was there as well, was one, but Pallet didn't want to join. I think his parents didn't let him come and join.
What was your take, by the way, on the whole SwordArt angle? Because the problem I heard is this: even people might know, like Nelson knows him, etc. People I'm connected with. I basically heard like he sort of knew even when he was joining this team, dude, it's sort of just for money. Like I heard basically because he knew we'd have these like new players like Lost and stuff. That the vibe was like, look, it either works out and they sort of get me in my style of shot calling, or it's probably just gonna be shit. Like I think even he knew it could just go badly, mate.
Yeah, I think he played into it as well.
Oh right,
like,
okay.
There's some stories I'm not going to disclose, but like for example, like he would play like one game of solo queue before our summer playoffs. He would show up in like panda slippers to the office.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. I think he was definitely there for the paycheck to some extent. I actually liked SwordArt out of game. It's just in game. I think he had a certain style of play, and he would just follow through with it to a fault. Like he would change his arguments mid review to the point where it was almost funny. Like if he said like, okay, this is one reason it happened. I didn't go for it because of this, and then after like 2 minutes of conversation, he would then renege on that argument and say he didn't do it for some other reason. So it was also ego driven, I think. But I think he did it was mainly for the money. I think that team was close to winning. Like we had pretty good macro, I would say, and everyone tried to win for the most part. I think Thorin was a really good coach. We had a good coaching staff. We'd Hatham, me, Curry, Thorin.
I mean, the problem here is people are going to conflate the 2 years of TSM. Like, what they're going to miss is the first year was the one where there was that point where the team was near the top of the table and was winning like most of the games. It was like the summer split or whatever where things were going well. Like at that point in time, like there was a world where this team, like if people don't remember, on paper, like this was supposed to be one of the world's teams, of course. Like this was going to be like one of the ones that got the last spot. It's just like Cloud9 clutched it out in the playoffs. Like that playoffs was crazy. It was a bunch of like 1,000,005 game series between all the teams. Like people are going to think of last year and think the team was terrible. Like this team actually, like you say, it was like that far away from being decent, right?
Yeah, we could have made worlds. Like we had like such an insane scrim win rate versus 100.
Right.
Two teams two teams that could have beat us were TL and C9, because we thought they had the mid jungles and they had the top sides of the map that could compete. Like I think that roster, we played through top, so I don't think we would have had a realistic chance of beating TL because they had the Alphari roster, which kind of played the similar style that we did, but just I think better players overall.
Sure.
I don't think we could have probably beaten them. And then 100 we matched up pretty well into. That was Someday mainly playing tanks, Aatrox, Ornn, and then we had Huni playing like Jace. I think we could have beaten 100. Still stylistically, I think we could have. I think TL had an off day on that summer finals, which sure, that's competition. Sometimes you just have an off day. And then C9, they just out clutched us in that series. I think we lost 3-2. So
it was very close.
C9, C9 ended up beating us, but that was on the day. They just played better. And then I think just how the bracket played out, we just missed it. And then spring was the COVID time where like we were we were in lockdown. Like we basically weren't allowed to leave our apartment or the facility for like 4 or 5 months. So. Yeah,
if people don't remember, that was the weird period where it's like you had to all play remotely and you had to like only certain people could come in and out of the room. Like that was like, it wasn't like any normal split. That was the one where people were going a bit crazy, just like climbing the walls inside these rooms, just locked in there for months and months.
Yeah, TSM had like one of the strictest policies on that.
Right.
Well. Like they had us on like Life 360, which basically tracks your phone.
Oh, okay, right. So they know where you are and everything, right?
Yeah, they would get notified if we like left our apartment or something like this, or like a bubble. But they also paid for like our groceries and whatnot. They did a lot of accommodations to make it
fair enough
suitable. But if you think about it, it's just like I don't.
It feels like you're in prison. Just feel like you're in prison. Yeah, of course.
So towards the end of spring, it was just like, guys, if we win, we're out of the bubble. If we lose,
exactly,
we're out of the bubble. So
yes, indeed. By the way, what would you say actually, because obviously Huni's a player in this era, right? Like I say, the biggest problem with Huni is this. Every other year where he was an import, I can flame the fuck out of some of these orgs that signed him. They were signing him for millions of dollars. They were basing their whole team around him. He did always have, for some reason in the LCS in the latter years, like a very like fucking very distinct style where he wanted to only play those certain champions he was really good at and definitely wanted like resource, etc. But the difference is, at least in this era, like I said, he was a resident player now. Like if you actually look at it against the other residents, like it's him and Impact, like they are the best player. Him and Impact and Sunday are like the OP players to be residents for NNA, because other than that you hope Licorice is in good form, and so after that there's no one left, like it's all imports. Yep. So I actually thought in this era he still was like a very, like, you know what I mean, like if he got certain picks he could carry, but there was also like he also did still have some hint in him, right?
Yeah, I think Huni's the best way to describe him is he amplifies the environment and the team around him. So if the team is inting or not playing up to standards, he will also play down to the standards, and that's why you saw him when he went to Dignitas Academy. He's like losing lane, diving without minions. Like
he didn't give
obviously
a fuck.
a player of his stature is not going to try at all if the team around him is just collapsing. But if the team around him and the staff around him is good and trying hard, then he will put forth his best effort. Now, do I think he could put forth a little bit more effort? Sure. But I think he just amplifies whatever environment is around him. So if the team's going bad, 2022 TSM, he'll make sure the ship sinks faster, or just he had wrist issues, so he had to retire. Or if it's going well, then he can amplify the performance of the team.
What would you even say after that about like the way the TSM gig went, mate? Because the problem with this is, like, it looks to me like in later years, there's either way less money or people just don't want to join TSM, it looks like. Because some of these players, even that were, like, what always gives it away is this, if you're a casual fan, is obviously behind the scenes you hear way more names, and then in public you hear a few names rumoured each roster season, and then there's who they actually get. Like, the difference between these years of the first one and the Super Team, and then going to, for 2022, mate, and that era, like, I was just hearing nothing. It sounded really dark. Like, obviously people know outside of that there's other things going on in the org and why people are leaving and all the rest of it. Like, well, how would you describe this period of, like, because look, the problem with your job is it makes you look like you suck, like you're picking these, it makes you, if you're a naive fan, think these are like the players you're dreaming of having in the team, all these names, you know. So it looks like it was a much more limited budget and set of players, am I right?
I didn't have full access to the budget, to be honest with you. It said that it was similar, but this is also the era where we had Parth was taking a step out. Bjergsen left.
That's true, yeah.
And then Parth, I think his intention was to stay for 6 months, and then he ended up stepping away during the roster and staff assembly. And then I think TSM didn't have they didn't have a backfill of staff in place already to fill these roles. Which I think is the growing pains of many esports orgs, where they don't have if certain people leave all at the same time, they won't be able to backfill the roles. And I think that's kind of where they faltered. And then in terms of the budget, it wasn't very clear how much budget we had. It was more like present the scenarios possible, and then we don't get to pick which scenario for the roster in some senses. We got to look at players, but the direction was steered from other angles.
One thing I will ask about, look, I didn't actually have any plan on asking about like the actual scandal with Peter and all that jazz, but one thing where it does impact your job is, one thing that I did find alarming about the potential implications of that was it was implied that like maybe someone would suggest a player was better than another one, not based on whether the player was better. And if you just look at some of the players that ended up joining this team, a lot of people think they were busts, quite frankly. A lot of people, you know, they didn't work. And the worst thing is, if people don't know some of the names that were being said instead, dude, I heard like, it wasn't like Bo from the Vitality Now, like one of the names who could have joined TSM. Like, I've heard there was some like really good players that were sort of chosen against, as it were. What would you say to that?
I can't get into much of this, but I can say Glenn, the GM now, did not arrive until after Spring Split. We didn't have a translator there whenever people arrived. It was just Peter Zhang. Peter Zhang was the one running the Chinese boot camp over. So, like, posting the VODs for the staff to see, and then I think Shenyi, like, I think his VODs from LPL and LDL were pretty okay. At the time, pretty good. It's just no one could vet his personality as well. The person vetting his personality was Peter. So I think it was too many fail-safes on one person that allowed for the situation. But I can't comment too much on like the whole situation in terms of that angle. But TSM, overall, I had an okay time, pretty good time for the first 2 years, and then the last year I think was more of just they didn't have a backlog of people filling the roles that all left at the same time. Plus Bjergsen leaving like a cornerstone of the org. I think it's better this year. Just last year, like a lot of stuff happened. And then I think in terms of player recruitment, I think the mystique of TSM of joining the org fell off over time, year after year after year. Then I think after Bjergsen left, the whole mystique now it's just an org that let's get players that all want to play hard for the. They need to get like this roster they assembled this year is a bunch of journeymen, so they all want to play hard because it's all in everyone's best interest to do so. But there's no like big name like flashes that are gonna come join.
Right, since you after this you went and joined Vitality, is it implied, like, was any of that like the Alphari hookup? Is it a coincidence he happens to be in the team?
No, not particularly. I was entertaining Vitality after the 2019 year, or before I joined TSM, I was also entertaining going to Vitality. And then my agent has been in contact with them over years, so it just kind of aligned where this is kind of the right role that I could fill. So I'm working on another project as well on the side that's not announced, but that's not something I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
But it was kind of the right fit where I could work partially remote and then partially in person throughout the year, and then just work. My schedule is most flexible, while also being on a top team, where the potential of the roster is very high. And then it's going well so far until like recent, like we just lost. But
yeah. As of the time we're recording, they've just lost in the groups, basically, didn't make it to the playoffs. So it's
in the groups, yeah.
What about this then? One thing I would ask you is, did you actually play any role in picking the players for this lineup? Was it already there when you joined? What was the case?
Bo was already locked in. I joined pretty late in the cycle. I knew the players we were considering, but the previous staff kind of selected. I think Carter joined before me, and then Yarn was already in place. So I think a lot of this was pre-selected. Perkz obviously probably had a huge say in who was joining.
Okay.
So I didn't really have that much say in this. I knew Bo was good because, as you said, we were considering him on TSM. And the reason that didn't come to fruition on TSM was due to other, basically money, to my knowledge. Contract money and like how the contracts worked in that time frame. But no, I didn't have that much say in the roster selection for this go round. I knew who they were considering. I gave them my opinion, but it wasn't like I was like, okay, I did the scouting. These are the players I think we should go for. But I did that on TSM, Origen, and some on Team Liquid for some of the players we were looking at Academy. TSM, I ran some of the scouting grounds, so for the Vitality roster, not as much.
Right, obviously in your career, you've worked with a lot of the biggest names, especially in European League of Legends, of like the great players. What is it like to work with Perkz? It must be a very interesting prospect, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any problems working with Perkz. He likes to play every champion possible. He has a pretty depth in terms of champion pool. Pretty easy, as long as you just... What I find with like working with the top players or giving them like feedback or information about how teams play, as long as you're just to the point and they see it as a positive for them, like it's only enhancing their play, they usually will listen or understand. Just explain things logically and don't present it in a long-winded manner.
This might sound weird if you're a casual fan listening. What he's addressing here that is mad underrated in coaching is a lot of the coaches, even though their job is just help the player win the game, that half of what they're doing is sort of trying to impress the player. Like, no, I really understand what I'm talking about. Like, and almost like justify their job and being there. Whereas, as you're saying, like, if you actually just cut through all the bullshit and tell the player, like, this is the thing you need to know, they might actually be more impressed by that than if you built up a whole fucking massive thing, re-explaining the same concept 50 times, right?
Yeah, it should just be to the point. Hey, this thing, like, okay, here's 3 videos. This is what I think we should do. This is why I think we should do it. Next point. So keep it short and concise, especially when you're working with like multilingual rosters. You have to do this because I've worked with like rosters where they all speak English and you can get more in depth with them. I've worked with players where they want to see more VODs and have more explanation. I've worked with some players where you just want to see a picture, explain the brief concept, and then go from there. So Perkz, I don't have any problems working with the more veteran players. I think it's actually pretty easy. Your job is, because they know most of their role, you just have to add the fine minor tweaks and find the minute information that's actually useful for them.
Yes. Right. obviously this lineup's so fresh, like there's not that many stories to even have, but the one player I do want to ask about before we wrap up is Bo, of course, because I was trying to explain to people, because you can always tell, like, the Westerners just never watched him in the LPL, and half of them don't even really know the story. Like, they don't seem to understand that, like, what I explain it like is this. The reason why this is one of the craziest imports ever, is because this is exactly the type of player that the West is never supposed to have access to. Like, this is the sort of player who would be like a world champion in an LPL team, or just like wouldn't even be on the table to sign. Like, because essentially, without going into it, the whole circumstance of why he can't play in the LPL and stopped is just so unique that it just meant this crazy opportunity got offered. As you say, it could have been TSM a couple of years ago. Now it's Vitality in Europe. Like, I actually think this is one of those ones where people still maybe, especially because of the results now of Vitality, maybe still aren't even hyped enough to. Because my premise goes like this: if this team can actually get it together and the rest of the team is good enough to be like up there with the great teams from the West going into the playoffs of Worlds, this is the sort of player that can just make the whole difference and win you a series against a top Asian team. Like, we're not supposed to have like a potential best Chinese jungler in a fucking Western team in the LEC. So to me, it's like a crazy opportunity. I don't think fans still understand that this could be amazing if it works out.
Yeah, this is more so just about giving time for Bo to adjust to the play of the players, and also the players how the staff and players best utilize him, where he doesn't play too aggressive or overchase in situations where he shouldn't. So I think it's definitely a high opportunity, like low risk, high opportunity cost in terms of signing, in my opinion. I think most teams would take this risk or gamble if they had the opportunity to. And the logistics around how he got banned in the LPL is also a little bit, it's not as clear as what the public is.
Right. People think it's an open and shut case. It's a bit more sketchy than that.
Yeah, like what they say, it's like where he was like match fixing. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that goes on.
Right.
I have a lot of inside stories from the TSM because Glenn and Chowie came from the LMS, and Maple played in those regions. SwordArt played in the LPL. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that's not public, and how that situation was handled is not exactly straightforward.
Okay.
So there's also that angle. So, and then he wasn't able to get signed because of, basically, it was in that culture, it's not very appropriate once you've been banned for something like that to come back to the league.
No, if people don't know that it's called in their culture like face, like if you lose like face that you consider dishonorable, that alone's enough to kick you out the league forever potentially, of course.
Yep, with sponsors and everything involved. And it could, having them play and then be a star in the league could have a negative light on the league in China. Like, so there's a lot of cultural stuff there. But so it was like it's a no-brainer signing, in my opinion, in terms of upside versus downside. So, and then he's assimilating pretty well to the culture overall. So he's like learning English, whereas like that last year TSM roster, some of the players, it seemed like they were there not trying to learn English.
Yep.
So I think the players you bring over need to be vetted one-on-one. Are they the type of person to try and adapt to the culture? Because if not, then it can turn into a outsider living in the US type situation or Europe.
At the end of this interview, do you have like a final message for people? Do you just want to thank anyone or say hello to anyone?
Any final thanks for the interview? I mean, you can follow me on my Twitter, but otherwise, it's been a roller coaster ride so far in esports. Between Direwolves to FNATIC to TL to Origen to TSM for 2 years, then now Vitality. So just support Vitality, and then hopefully we turn it around for the rest remaining of the year.
The Beatles said they get by with a little help from their friends, but I get by with a little help from my Patreon community. And this video was kindly supported by Matt Pugnaccio Racula, Ahmed Haju, Bot Pounder 420, Toucan, Animosity, Tobias Bernasconi, Jensen Gore, Tosh, and a special thanks always goes out to my main man, Xerxe's Minion. Would you like to ask me a question in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers to find out who are the upcoming guests? Maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy but intense esports discussions I have with my donators, or maybe you want to suggest a guest or a topic that I could cover. Well, if any of those tickle your fancy, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today, where in the description box below there is a Patreon link.